Deep within the chaotic expanse of the Eye of Terror, where reality frays and sanity is a fleeting whisper, a figure lurks in the gloom of his laboratories, shaping nightmares into flesh. His name is spoken with a mix of awe and revulsion, a specter of the Horus heresy, whose work defies the very nature of life and death. Fabius Bile, the Clone Lord, the primogenitor, the architect of perverse miracles, operates beyond the reach of both the Imperium and his former brothers. His name has long been synonymous with horror, but the depths of his latest endeavors may yet eclipse even his most profane atrocities. To understand what Fabius Bile is creating, one must first grasp the world he inhabits. The 41st millennium is a time of stagnation and decay, where progress is heresy and innovation is punishable by death. The Imperium of Man, a crumbling empire held together by faith, superstition, and sheer brutality, fears knowledge as much as it does the Xenos hordes and the warp-born nightmares that gnaw at the edges of reality. In this bleak age, biology is a sacred relic, understood only through the dogmatic rituals of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who venerate the past but do not seek to surpass it. Yet beyond the Emperor's corpse-lit domain, there exists a different kind of pursuit, one driven by unchained ambition, unhindered by laws or morality. Fabius Bile is not bound by the archaic constraints of the Imperium, nor the insidious dogma of chaos. He is a rogue scientist, a master of genetic corruption, and perhaps the last true seeker of scientific progress, though his definition of progress would shatter the minds of lesser beings. He does not serve the dark gods, nor does he seek their favor. Instead, he walks the razor's edge between divine revelation and absolute madness, forever seeking to refine the genetic blueprint of mankind. It is easy to dismiss Fabius as just another madman in a galaxy teeming with insanity, but such an assessment would be a grave mistake. Unlike the fallen demagogues and possessed warlords of the traitor legions, he is not a slave to the ruinous powers. He has no interest in the great game of the gods, nor does he crave the petty glories of war. His mind is fixed on a singular purpose, perfection. But what, in his mind, constitutes perfection? And how far is he willing to go to achieve it? Whispers echo through the Eye of Terror. Bile's experiments have escalated, his work becoming more ambitious, more monstrous than ever before. He has long been known for his grotesque creations, twisted abominations of flesh and sinew, fused with impossible anatomy, built for war, suffering, and dominance. But this time, the rumors hint at something far worse. Something that defies even the obscene horrors of his previous work. Some claim he is forging a new race, one designed to replace mankind itself. Others speak of a horror so vast, so incomprehensible, that even the gods of chaos turn their gaze away in disgust. What is Fabius Bile creating? Is it the pinnacle of evolution, or the final doom of humanity? The answer lies buried in the depths of his laboratories, where flesh and bone are merely ingredients, and where the future of the galaxy is being rewritten, one monstrous experiment at a time. And so the stage is set. The shadows lengthen. The galaxy watches, unaware of the horror that may soon crawl forth from the Clone Lord's hands. At the center of these twisted machinations stands Fabius Bile, the architect of the horrors unfolding in the shadows. A figure detached from the constraints of loyalty, he operates with singular purpose, driven neither by worship nor conquest. His mind, vast in its knowledge of genetics and modification, sees the flesh of humanity as nothing more than a canvas, a resource to be reshaped according to his own designs. He does not seek to serve or to follow. He creates, molding existence itself in pursuit of his own vision. His methods are unshackled from morality, and his work, though steeped in grotesque cruelty, follows a logic known only to him. Wherever he treads, suffering follows, but it is not suffering he desires, merely a consequence of his relentless ambition. Around him gather those who enable his grim pursuits, whether by allegiance, desperation, or exploitation. His most direct followers are the members of the Consortium, a fractured collective of former warriors and rogue scholars who, despite their own ambitions, bend to his will. These individuals, drawn from various places, lack the unity of the warbands that plague the galaxy, yet their skills make them invaluable to Bile's work. Each possesses some expertise, medical, surgical, technological, that furthers the goal of reshaping life. However, they are not bound by loyalty but by necessity, and when they no longer serve their purpose, they are discarded as easily as the flesh he carves. Beyond his immediate circle are the flesh crafters, assistants in his experiments who partake in the refinement of his abominable creations. Some of these individuals willingly partake in his work, believing in the potential of his research. Others have been coerced, dragged into his service with no means of escape. Their skills vary. Some were once healers, others torturers, many nothing more than eager learners fascinated by the possibilities of what they can create. Whether they act from conviction or fear, they assist in the relentless cycle of testing, dissecting, and refining the horrors being assembled in secret. His reach extends beyond his laboratories, drawing the attention of those who recognize his work as both a potential asset and a significant threat. Among them are the war bands of the traitor legions, splintered groups that roam the void, seeking advantage wherever they can find it. Some seek his expertise, offering captives or resources in exchange for augmentation. Others resent him, viewing his independence as an insult to the gods they serve. Though some have attempted to claim his knowledge for themselves, few have succeeded in even approaching him without consequence. The bitter, broken remnants of the past view him with both suspicion and begrudging respect. There are those outside the madness of the warp who remain aware of his existence. The Imperium, though vast and unwieldy, has not forgotten his crimes. The forces of the Inquisition, ever watchful for threats to humanity, have not ceased in their efforts to eliminate him. Their knowledge of his activities is incomplete, but even fragments of his work are enough to spark fear among them. Some have speculated that his actions could bring about something even more catastrophic than the countless wars already consuming the galaxy. However, the Imperium is not unified in its pursuit of him. Many view him as a threat, but there are those who recognize that his knowledge, if captured, could be used for purposes beyond simple extermination. Beyond the known forces of the galaxy, there exist other entities whose interests may intersect with his. There are always those who seek power through forbidden means, those who wish to alter their existence beyond what nature intended. His work does not remain hidden forever. In the right or wrong hands, his knowledge could lead to something beyond even his own control. Each participant, whether ally, rival, or prey, plays a role in the unfolding nightmare. Some contribute willingly, others are dragged into his experiments without understanding their true purpose. Some seek to destroy him, while others merely wish to use him. Yet despite all these forces, despite all the schemes and conflicts that surround him, he remains undeterred. His work continues, and those who attempt to interfere rarely live to regret it. The foundation for the latest horrors taking shape in the depths of the warp was not laid in a single moment, but through a series of events that stretched across centuries. It began long before the current age, before the Imperium's decline became irreversible, before the traitor legions splintered beyond recognition. The seeds of this moment were sown in the earliest days of genetic manipulation, in the pursuit of creating something beyond the limits imposed by nature. What exists now is merely the latest manifestation of that obsession, one driven by necessity as much as ambition. The galaxy has long been a place of stagnation, where innovation is suppressed and progress is treated as an aberration rather than a goal. For those willing to defy this order, exile or destruction has always been the likely outcome. The pursuit of altering human biology was never fully embraced, even in the ages before the Imperium solidified its doctrines. But among those who survived the purges of progress, there were always individuals who refused to let such knowledge be lost. Even as the war for survival consumed entire worlds, the hunger to push beyond the constraints of mortality never fully disappeared. The state of the galaxy has only reinforced the need for something beyond the existing forms of life. Humanity teeters on the edge of extinction, beset by threats both external and internal. The forces that govern the Imperium grow more inflexible with each passing century, their doctrines strangling any attempt to adapt. The alien races that lurk beyond the light of the Astronomicon show no sign of weakening, and the entities of the warp continue their endless, insidious influence. In such a state, the demand for change grows louder, though it is whispered in secret, never spoken where it might be heard by those who enforce compliance. The wars that followed the Great Betrayal fractured the once mighty legions, leaving their remnants scattered and desperate. The strongest of them carved out territories, becoming rulers of doomed domains, while others descended into madness, their minds broken by the influence of the immaterial. But there were those who sought another path, one that did not lead to conquest nor to blind servitude. They turned to the sciences that had once been forbidden, seeking to alter their own existence to escape the cycle of suffering. The experiments that followed were not acts of vanity, but of survival. The desire to surpass the limitations of flesh was not merely a pursuit of power. It was the only means of ensuring that anything might endure. The current work taking place is not a result of random curiosity, but of accumulated failures and realizations. Earlier attempts to improve the human form were met with resistance, not only from the Imperium, but from those who had once been allies. The rejection of these ideas did not halt their progression, only forced them further into secrecy. The lessons learned from those past efforts have shaped the methods used now. The mistakes that led to instability, the failures that produced uncontrollable results, all have been studied, analyzed, and refined. The resources required to continue such a pursuit have always been scarce, but desperation breeds ingenuity. There are always those willing to trade, whether for knowledge, for weapons, or for modifications of their own. The need for test subjects has never diminished, and in the depths of lawless space, the supply of raw material never truly runs out. Whether taken from prisoners, from the ranks of those deemed unworthy, or even from willing participants, the bodies required for experimentation continue to be provided. The methods have changed, the scale has grown, but the fundamental principle remains the same. Life is a resource to be broken down and rebuilt according to the needs of those with the knowledge to do so. What is unfolding now did not arise in isolation. It is the culmination of every experiment that came before, every lesson learned through blood and suffering. The failures of past projects have only fueled the need to create something more refined, something that will not crumble under its own imperfections. The conditions of the galaxy have ensured that such work is not just desirable, but inevitable. In a universe where everything is either decaying or being consumed, the only path left is to build something that cannot be undone. Whether that creation will be the salvation of those who seek it, or the beginning of an even greater horror, remains to be seen. The foundation for the latest horrors taking shape in the depths of the warp was not laid in a single moment, but through a series of events that stretched across centuries. It began long before the current age, before the Imperium's decline became irreversible, before the traitor legions splintered beyond recognition. The seeds of this moment were sown in the earliest days of genetic manipulation, in the pursuit of creating something beyond the limits imposed by nature. What exists now is merely the latest manifestation of that obsession, one driven by necessity as much as ambition. The galaxy has long been a place of stagnation, where innovation is suppressed and progress is treated as an aberration rather than a goal. For those willing to defy this order, exile or destruction has always been the likely outcome. The pursuit of altering human biology was never fully embraced, even in the ages before the Imperium solidified its doctrines. But among those who survived the purges of progress, there were always individuals who refused to let such knowledge be lost. Even as the war for survival consumed entire worlds, the hunger to push beyond the constraints of mortality never fully disappeared. The state of the galaxy has only reinforced the need for something beyond the existing forms of life. Humanity teeters on the edge of extinction, beset by threats both external and internal. The forces that govern the Imperium grow more inflexible with each passing century, their doctrine strangling any attempt to adapt. The alien races that lurk beyond the light of the Astronomicon show no sign of weakening, and the entities of the warp continue their endless, insidious influence. In such a state, the demand for change grows louder, though it is whispered in secret, never spoken where it might be heard by those who enforce compliance. The wars that followed the Great Betrayal fractured the once mighty legions, leaving their remnants scattered and desperate. The strongest of them carved out territories, becoming rulers of doomed domains, while others descended into madness, their minds broken by the influence of the immaterial. But there were those who sought another path, one that did not lead to conquest nor to blind servitude. They turned to the sciences that had once been forbidden, seeking to alter their own existence to escape the cycle of suffering. The experiments that followed were not acts of vanity but of survival. The desire to surpass the limitations of flesh was not merely a pursuit of power. It was the only means of ensuring that anything might endure. The current work taking place is not a result of random curiosity, but of accumulated failures and realizations. Earlier attempts to improve the human form were met with resistance, not only from the Imperium, but from those who had once been allies. The rejection of these ideas did not halt their progression, only forced them further into secrecy. The lessons learned from those past efforts have shaped the methods used now. The mistakes that led to instability, the failures that produced uncontrollable results, all have been studied, analyzed, and refined. The resources required to continue such a pursuit have always been scarce, but desperation breeds ingenuity. There are always those willing to trade, whether for knowledge, for weapons, or for modifications of their own. The need for test subjects has never diminished, and in the depths of lawless space, the supply of raw material never truly runs out. Whether taken from prisoners, from the ranks of those deemed unworthy, or even from willing participants, the bodies required for experimentation continue to be provided. The methods have changed, the scale has grown, but the fundamental principle remains the same. Life is a resource to be broken down and rebuilt according to the needs of those with the knowledge to do so. What is unfolding now did not arise in isolation. It is the culmination of every experiment that came before, every lesson learned through blood and suffering. The failures of past projects have only fueled the need to create something more refined, something that will not crumble under its own imperfections. The conditions of the galaxy have ensured that such work is not just desirable, but inevitable. In a universe where everything is either decaying or being consumed, the only path left is to build something that cannot be undone. Whether that creation will be the salvation of those who seek it, or the beginning of an even greater horror, remains to be seen. The series of events leading to the current stage of experimentation did not unfold in a single decisive moment. Instead, they progressed in phases, each marked by a refinement of methods, the acquisition of new resources, and the escalation of ambition. What began as a continuation of previous work has now evolved into something far more advanced, surpassing anything that had been attempted before. The earliest stage of the current project was characterized by the establishment of hidden facilities deep within the warp's shifting landscape. These locations were carefully chosen to ensure secrecy, avoiding detection not only by external threats, but also by those who might seek to claim the results for themselves. Many of these sites were built upon the ruins of past endeavors, scavenged from remnants of lost laboratories and research stations that had been abandoned or destroyed in earlier conflicts. These places were stripped of their former inhabitants, their infrastructure repurposed to serve a new and more refined purpose. With a secure foundation in place, the next phase focused on gathering the necessary materials to continue the work. This was not limited to physical resources but extended to knowledge, data, and specimens required to push the research forward. Previous experiments had provided insight into what was possible, but gaps remained. gaps that needed to be filled before progress could continue. New sources of genetic material were acquired, some willingly provided, others taken by force. The acquisition of unique biological samples became a priority as the work demanded access to material beyond the standard human genome. The search extended beyond the limits of known space, drawing from sources that had never before been considered viable. Once the initial groundwork was complete, the process of refinement began. The early iterations of the project were unstable as expected. Each failure served as a lesson, allowing for adjustments to be made. The knowledge gained from previous miscalculations was applied to improve the methods, eliminating weaknesses and reinforcing the stability of the developing subjects. Testing was relentless, each cycle designed to push the limits of what the modifications could endure. The elimination of inefficiencies became a priority. Any process that produced instability or unpredictability was either altered or discarded entirely. As stability increased, the scale of the project expanded. New avenues of experimentation were introduced, each building upon the successes of the previous stages. The objectives shifted from basic viability to full functionality, ensuring that what was being created was not only stable, but capable of fulfilling the intended purpose. This stage was marked by a significant increase in complexity as additional enhancements were integrated. Refinements in control mechanisms were implemented to ensure obedience and reliability. The risk of failure decreased, but so did the margin for error. Each step forward carried with it the potential for catastrophic consequences if something went wrong. The current stage represents the culmination of these efforts. The process has reached a level of sophistication where the results are no longer merely theoretical but tangible. The final modifications are being made, adjustments refined down to the smallest detail. The final tests are underway, designed to push the limits of what has been created. What comes next will determine whether this experiment will achieve its ultimate goal or if it will end in failure, as so many past attempts have before. At this point, there is no turning back. Too much has been invested, too much knowledge uncovered, too many steps taken to halt the progression. The work has moved beyond the realm of speculation and into the final stages of execution. What remains is to see whether the result will be the realization of a long-standing vision or the birth of something even more dangerous than anticipated. The time for preparation is over. The moment of revelation is near. The pivotal moment in this experiment was not marked by a single breakthrough, but by a choice, one that redefined the direction of the entire project. For all the trials, all the failures and refinements, there came a point where theoretical advancements had to be set aside, and the work had to move from careful iteration to final execution. This was not a moment of hesitation, nor was it driven by uncertainty. The decision was made with absolute conviction, for it was the only way forward. The experiment had reached a stage where further refinements would yield diminishing returns, where every additional modification threatened to undermine what had already been achieved. There was nothing more to test, nothing left to adjust. The only thing that remained was to enact the final step. The turning point came when it was decided that the project had to move from controlled environments to real conditions, that its results needed to be tested outside of the sterile confines of a laboratory. The limitations of observation, of calculated predictions, had reached their threshold. There was only so much that could be learned from controlled scenarios, only so much that numbers and measurements could reveal. If the experiment was to succeed, it needed to prove itself beyond theory. It had to be let loose. This was not a reckless act, nor was it born from impatience. It was necessary. The dangers had been calculated, the risks weighed. There was no alternative, no way to truly understand the potential of what had been created without witnessing it in action. The decision was final. Containment was no longer an option. But more than that, the experiment required confrontation. The goal had never been to create something that would simply exist. It was meant to endure, to surpass, to dominate. Without exposure to true opposition, without being tested in conditions where failure meant annihilation, there could be no certainty that it had fulfilled its purpose. It was no longer a question of whether the modifications were viable in isolation. Now, they needed to be measured against the forces that had long defined the galaxy. It was at this moment that control was relinquished, that observation was replaced with direct consequence. The final order was given, the last restrictions removed. The experiment was no longer something that could be contained. It had been given its purpose, and now it would prove whether it could fulfill it. What followed would either mark the greatest triumph of its creator or the most catastrophic failure in the long history of such endeavors. Either way, the result would be undeniable. There was no expectation of retrieval, no contingency to undo what had been set in motion. The decision had been made, and with it, the fate of everything that followed was now out of anyone's hands. The experiment had become something more than a theory, more than a creation to be studied. It had become an event, an unfolding reality that could not be undone. What had once been hidden within the depths of research and secrecy was now loose in the galaxy. Whatever came next, it would not be forgotten. The moment the experiment was unleashed, the consequences rippled outward, altering the delicate balance of power across multiple factions. It did not happen all at once. The first signs were subtle, unexplained disappearances, disturbances in remote war zones, whispered rumors carried by survivors who could not fully comprehend what they had encountered. But these early fragments of information were only the beginning. As the full extent of what had been set in motion became apparent, the impact grew impossible to ignore. Among the first to react were those closest to the source. The forces operating within the warp's depths, scattered warbands, isolated outposts, and those who lurked on the fringes of stability, became the initial testing grounds for what had been created. Some witnessed it firsthand, their forces torn apart before they could even understand the nature of what they faced. Others learned through indirect means, recognizing patterns in the destruction, piecing together the evidence left behind. These groups, though hardened by war and chaos, found themselves dealing with something beyond the horrors they had grown accustomed to. The few who managed to escape spoke of entities that did not conform to any known pattern, of weapons and tactics that defied conventional logic. What had once been confined to theory was now an undeniable reality. As the presence of this new force spread, its influence extended beyond the shadows. The Imperium, ever watchful for disturbances that might threaten its fragile dominion, took notice of the anomalies. At first, the reports were dismissed, lost in the endless tide of conflicts that consumed the galaxy. But as more incidents occurred, as entire sectors reported unusual engagements and inexplicable events, the threat could no longer be ignored. The nature of the enemy was unclear, yet the pattern was undeniable. Wherever these new forces struck, they left no clear survivors, no conventional traces of their origin. This lack of identifiable characteristics only deepened the paranoia. Was this a new enemy? A deviation of an existing one? Or something worse, something engineered with a purpose beyond mere destruction? The forces of the warp reacted with a mixture of interest and hostility. Some sought to claim the creation for their own, believing that anything born of such advanced manipulation could be turned into a weapon for their own purposes. Others viewed it as an abomination, a deviation that threatened the natural order of dominance they had established. The warbands that sought to exploit it soon learned that it could not be controlled. Their attempts to harness its power ended in devastation, their warriors falling to an enemy that did not follow the predictable patterns of conflict. The realization set in: this was not a force that could be bargained with, nor was it an ally to any known faction. It moved according to its own purpose, one that was not dictated by the whims of gods or warlords. Among those who paid the greatest price were the scattered remnants of those who had once considered themselves powerful. Raiders, conquerors, and seekers of forbidden knowledge who had grown accustomed to thriving in the lawless voids of space found themselves hunted. They had built their empires on understanding the rules of survival, but this new force did not play by those rules. Entire war bands vanished, their ships found drifting and silent, their fortresses reduced to husks devoid of life. Some speculated that these losses were the result of an internal purge, that the factions had turned on themselves. But those who had seen the truth knew better. This was something new, something that did not conform to the old ways of war. The implications stretched further still. The Imperium, upon recognizing the scope of the disturbance, found itself faced with a crisis it was unprepared for. The usual methods of extermination, the doctrines that had served it for millennia, were met with failure. The forces deployed to investigate found themselves engaging an enemy that did not react as expected, that did not falter under the traditional weight of overwhelming firepower. Reports from the front lines detailed engagements that defied conventional warfare, describing an opponent that adapted faster than any recorded threat. Even the most disciplined forces struggled to keep pace, their strategies rendered ineffective against something designed to overcome them. The final and perhaps most insidious effect was the spread of uncertainty. What had once been clear divisions of power now seemed less stable. The factions that had long dictated the conflicts of the galaxy found themselves confronted by an unknown factor, one that could not be explained or easily countered. Rumors spread faster than facts, each account more alarming than the last. If something had been created that could surpass all previous attempts at enhancement, what did that mean for the future? If a force had been engineered to rise above the limitations of its predecessors, how long before it turned its gaze on the rest of the galaxy? The immediate consequences were destruction, chaos, and fear, but the deeper impact was yet to be understood. What had been released was not simply a new weapon, not merely another entity to add to the countless horrors of existence. It was something else, something that would force every faction to reconsider the foundation of their power. Whether they wished to acknowledge it or not, the galaxy had changed, and nothing would be the same again. Among the many horrors lurking within the depths of forbidden science, few evoke as much speculation as the creations emerging from these latest experiments. The question of what exactly has been engineered leads to discussions that extend far beyond the immediate consequences of the project. There are aspects of this work that defy standard classifications, that hint at possibilities few are willing to consider. These developments are not merely the result of refined genetic manipulation, but of something far more intricate, something that challenges the very nature of what is possible within the known limits of biology and technology. One of the most heavily debated aspects of these creations is the degree of autonomy they possess. Unlike previous experiments, which often resulted in monstrous aberrations driven by instinct or the will of their creator, there are indications that the latest results exhibit a level of self-direction beyond anything previously achieved. This is not mere programming, nor is it the crude implantation of artificial control measures. It is something more organic, something that allows these entities to think, adapt, and function without direct oversight. The implications of this are disturbing, as it raises the question of whether these beings are truly creations or if they represent something more, something capable of developing its own purpose beyond what was intended. Closely tied to this is the question of genetic stability. Earlier experiments, particularly those focused on enhancement, often produced unpredictable results, with many creations falling apart under the weight of their modifications. Yet there is increasing evidence that these new entities have overcome the inherent instability that plagued past attempts. If this is true, then it suggests that a breakthrough has been made, one that eliminates the need for constant intervention, one that allows for sustained function without degradation. This level of refinement is unprecedented, as it suggests that these beings are not temporary constructs, but something that could persist indefinitely. Another point of intense debate is the question of whether these creations are entirely biological or if they represent a fusion of multiple disciplines. Traditional methods of enhancement relied on augmentations that were either mechanical or biochemical in nature, each with their own set of limitations. But if reports are to be believed, these new entities do not conform to either of these categories. There are whispers that their physiology is something new entirely, something that integrates aspects of multiple sciences in ways that defy categorization. Some speculate that they may possess elements that mimic certain traits found in more extreme forms of life, adapting to environments that should be inhospitable, recovering from damage in ways that do not align with known biological processes. The question of purpose remains unresolved. Every previous project, no matter how ambitious, has always had a clear goal, whether it was to create stronger warriors, more resilient hosts, or more efficient killing machines. But there is no clear indication of what these new creations are meant to achieve. This uncertainty fuels theories that range from the plausible to the outright nightmarish. Some argue that they are meant to replace the flawed remnants of existing forces, serving as a new foundation upon which something greater can be built. Others believe they are an experiment in self-sustaining evolution, entities designed to grow beyond their original parameters. The most disturbing theory suggests that they may not be limited by external control at all, that they have been designed to exist beyond the authority of their own creator. There is also the matter of replication. Traditional means of producing enhanced entities have always relied on limited and often unstable methods. But if the stability of these new creations is real, then it raises a far greater concern. Can they propagate? If they are capable of replicating their own kind, then what has been created is not simply a new breed of soldier or test subject. It is an entirely new form of life. A life that does not need external intervention to continue. A force that does not require maintenance. A presence that could spread without restraint. Beyond the biological aspects, there are those who suspect that these creations have been designed with an awareness of their own nature. If this is the case, then they are not just stronger, not just more advanced. They are capable of understanding their place in the galaxy. This is not a mere refinement of previous work. This is something that alters the fundamental rules of existence. If they are aware, if they recognize themselves as distinct from those who created them, then they may not act according to expectations. They may have their own goals, their own sense of identity, their own way of interpreting the world around them. What has been created is not a weapon in the traditional sense. It is something more, something that could surpass everything that came before. Whether it is a step toward evolution or the beginning of an uncontrollable force remains unknown. But one thing is certain. Whatever has been unleashed, it cannot be ignored. At the heart of this grim undertaking stand individuals whose ambitions, skills, and flaws have shaped the course of events. Their influence extends beyond mere participation. They are the catalysts, the ones who have driven the project forward, whether by their own will or through the circumstances that bind them to it. Each plays a role in this unfolding horror, their strengths making them invaluable, their weaknesses threatening to unravel everything. The architect of this experiment remains a singular figure, his mind a labyrinth of contradictions. He is a being of unmatched intellect, a master of his craft whose understanding of genetics and augmentation surpasses that of any known figure in the current age. His knowledge is not confined to theory, but is applied with ruthless efficiency. He is not hindered by the constraints of morality, seeing flesh as a resource to be shaped according to necessity. Yet, for all his brilliance, he is not infallible. His pursuit of perfection blinds him to the dangers of his own creations. His arrogance has led to failures before, and while he learns from them, his inability to accept that some things may be beyond control remains his greatest flaw. He believes himself beyond the reach of those who would seek to undo his work, yet history has shown that his greatest threats often come not from external enemies, but from the results of his own ambition. Among those closest to the project are his most trusted assistants, individuals chosen for their expertise rather than their loyalty. Some are surgeons and biologists whose skills have been honed through years of experimentation. Others are former warriors who have cast aside their past allegiances in pursuit of something greater. They are not bound by ideology but by necessity, each drawn to the project for reasons that vary from intellectual curiosity to the promise of power. Their strengths lie in their adaptability, their willingness to push beyond the limitations imposed by tradition. However, this same trait is also their greatest weakness. They are unpredictable, their own ambitions threatening to fracture the stability of the operation. Some seek to use the knowledge they have gained for their own purposes, while others fear the consequences of what they have helped create. Beyond the immediate circle of those involved in the project, there exist figures who have taken an interest in its outcome. Some operate in the shadows, their identities unknown, their motives unclear. They do not seek to disrupt the work, but rather to observe, waiting to see if the results align with their own objectives. These figures are dangerous, not because they wield open power, but because their influence is subtle, their reach extending beyond what is immediately visible. Their interests suggest that the implications of the project stretch further than anticipated, that the results may serve purposes beyond the original intent. Then there are those who see this work as an abomination, figures who operate outside of the experiment, yet whose actions have been shaped by its existence. Some are driven by a sense of duty, believing that what has been created poses a threat too great to be ignored. Others act out of personal vendetta, seeking to destroy the work not for the sake of the galaxy, but for their own satisfaction. These individuals are relentless, their pursuit fueled by a conviction that makes them formidable opponents. Yet they, too, are flawed. Their obsession blinds them, their refusal to acknowledge the complexities of the situation, leaving them vulnerable. They see only the horror before them, not the full scope of what is at stake. Among the most intriguing figures are those who exist on the fringes, neither fully aligned with the project nor entirely opposed to it. These are individuals who recognize the significance of what is unfolding, but have yet to determine how they will act. Some see an opportunity, a chance to turn the results to their own advantage. Others hesitate, aware that their involvement could have consequences beyond their control. These figures are the most unpredictable, their actions determined not by allegiance but by circumstance. They may become allies or enemies, their decisions shaping the course of events in ways that cannot yet be foreseen. Each of these figures, whether they stand at the center of the experiment or merely observe from the shadows, plays a role in what is unfolding. Their strengths have allowed the project to reach its current stage, but their weaknesses threaten to bring it to ruin. Some will see their ambitions realized, others will fall to their own miscalculations. The only certainty is that none of them will emerge unchanged. What they have helped create is beyond anything that has come before, and whether they wish it or not, they are now bound to its fate. Despite all that is known about the experiments and their implications, many questions remain unanswered. The nature of what has been created, its true purpose, and the long-term consequences of its existence continue to fuel endless speculation. Some theories attempt to piece together scattered fragments of evidence, while others venture into the realm of the unthinkable. Each unanswered question deepens the mystery, leaving room for speculation about what the final outcome may be. One of the most debated topics concerns the ultimate objective behind these creations. While theories abound regarding their role in warfare, survival, or even ascension beyond the limits of biology, there is no consensus on what the final goal might be. Some argue that this is merely another attempt at achieving perfection, an obsession that has driven past experiments to their inevitable collapse. Others believe that the true aim goes beyond conventional expectations, that this is not just an experiment in enhancement, but the first step towards something far more radical, perhaps even an attempt to rewrite the genetic blueprint of humanity itself. A particularly unsettling question is whether the project is truly under control. The degree of autonomy these creations exhibit suggests that they are not merely tools to be used, but entities with their own ability to reason, adapt, and potentially act beyond their intended purpose. If they are capable of independent thought, what ensures their compliance? Are they still bound by the will of their creator, or have they already begun to operate according to their own logic? The possibility that they may not follow the commands of those who made them is a concern that cannot be ignored. If they possess awareness of their nature, then they may also possess the ability to choose their own path, one that may not align with the intentions behind their creation. There is also the question of their true origin. The process that led to their development remains deliberately obscured, and while much of the knowledge behind their formation can be traced to previous projects, there are aspects that do not align with any known methodology. Some have speculated that external influences may have played a role, that the knowledge required to complete this work was not obtained solely through conventional means. The possibility that something beyond the physical realm contributed to their design raises troubling implications. If the experiment was shaped by forces beyond those who initiated it, then its outcome may not be entirely predictable. Another point of speculation revolves around their limitations. Every previous attempt at altering the fundamental nature of life has eventually encountered barriers, whether through physical constraints, genetic instability, or unexpected side effects. Yet reports suggest that this time, those barriers may have been overcome. If this is true, then what prevents these creations from continuing to develop beyond what was intended? If they have the capability to grow, evolve, and refine themselves, then they may not require external intervention to improve. This raises the disturbing possibility that they may not remain static, that they could become something greater than what was originally designed. If this is the case, then there is no certainty regarding what they may become or whether they will remain bound by the purpose for which they were initially created. A particularly contentious debate centers on whether these experiments have produced something entirely new or if they are merely a refined version of what has come before. Some argue that this is simply another step in a long line of genetic modifications, an extension of previous knowledge. Others believe that what has been created is not merely an advancement, but an entirely separate entity, something that no longer fits within existing classifications. If this is the case, then it raises an even greater concern. If they are fundamentally different from what has come before, then how can they be predicted, controlled, or understood? Perhaps the most troubling question of all is whether they were ever meant to be contained in the first place. If this project has reached a point where it has moved beyond oversight, then what happens next is no longer dictated by those who initiated it. Whether this was intentional or the result of unforeseen developments is unclear. But if the experiment has already exceeded expectations, then the outcome is no longer a matter of simple success or failure. It has become something else entirely, something that may already be beyond the ability of anyone to stop. Theories continue to circulate, each more unsettling than the last. Some believe that the purpose of these creations extends far beyond what has been assumed, that they may have been designed with objectives no one fully understands. Others argue that they are not the end goal but merely the beginning, that this is only the first stage of something even more ambitious. With so many unanswered questions, the only certainty is that whatever has been created will not simply disappear. It will continue to grow, to spread, and to reshape the galaxy in ways that no one can yet predict. The long-term consequences of these experiments stretch far beyond their immediate impact. What has been created will not simply fade into obscurity. It will continue to shape events, altering the balance of power and challenging the established order in ways that cannot yet be fully comprehended. Whether this shift will bring about destruction, transformation, or something entirely unforeseen remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: this is not a development that can be ignored. One of the most significant concerns is the potential spread of this creation. If it possesses the ability to sustain itself, adapt, and propagate without reliance on external intervention, then its influence will only grow over time. This could lead to an entirely new force emerging within the galaxy, one that does not align with any known faction. Such a force could become a destabilizing element, disrupting existing conflicts and alliances. The power struggles that have defined the galaxy for millennia may shift in unpredictable ways, as the presence of this new entity forces others to react, either through direct opposition or by attempting to harness its potential for their own ends. For the Imperium, this development represents a profound threat. Already stretched thin, its ability to respond to new dangers is limited. If this creation spreads beyond its point of origin, it may introduce a level of unpredictability that the Imperium is ill-equipped to handle. It is not merely another war that must be fought, but a fundamental shift in the nature of conflict itself. Traditional methods of suppression may prove ineffective, leaving those in power scrambling to understand and contain something that was never meant to be controlled through conventional means. Even if efforts are made to eliminate it, there is no guarantee that they will succeed. The sheer scale of the Imperium makes it impossible to track every new anomaly, and if even a fraction of this creation remains undetected, it could continue to evolve unnoticed until it is too late. Beyond the Imperium, other factions may find themselves forced to reconsider their own positions. Those who rely on genetic modification or biological enhancement may see this development as an opportunity, a chance to advance beyond their own limitations. Some may attempt to study and replicate the results, believing that they can harness its potential for their own survival. But this carries its own risks. If what has been created is truly independent, then any attempt to integrate or control it may backfire, leading to unforeseen consequences that spiral beyond what even the most ambitious minds anticipate. The potential for conflict does not end with external forces. Even among those responsible for its creation, there may be fractures. If this experiment continues to evolve, then disagreements over its purpose and direction could lead to internal struggles. Some may wish to see it refined further, while others may begin to question whether it should have been pursued at all. If divisions emerge, then the very forces that created this entity may find themselves at odds, torn between those who see it as the future and those who fear the consequences of what they have unleashed. There is also the question of whether this development marks the beginning of a larger shift. If this experiment proves successful, then it may not remain an isolated event. Those who seek to push the limits of biology, science, and warfare may take inspiration from what has been achieved, leading to further projects that build upon these foundations. What was once seen as extreme may become the new standard, and the boundaries that once defined life and augmentation may blur beyond recognition. The very nature of what it means to be human, or even to exist as a distinct entity, could be altered in ways that no one can yet predict. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that this creation may act according to motives that are not yet understood. If it continues to grow, if it develops beyond its original parameters, then its objectives may change over time. What begins as a controlled experiment may evolve into something that defines its own purpose, something that does not conform to the expectations of those who first set it in motion. If that happens, then the galaxy will not be facing a new weapon or a new species. It will be facing something entirely unknown, something that does not fit within the established rules of existence. The true impact of this experiment will not be felt immediately. It may take years, centuries, or even longer for its full effects to manifest. But once a force like this has been introduced, it cannot be undone. It will continue to shape events in ways that no one can fully anticipate, forcing every faction to adapt or risk being left behind. Whether this will ultimately lead to a new era of power or to an uncontrollable disaster remains to be seen. What is certain is that the galaxy has changed, and there is no going back.